Sarah and Sandrea at 6:30. So whenever you guys want to, if you want to give it a couple minutes, we can give it a couple minutes, or we can get going.
I guess another maybe minute or two. I don't know if all the students are in, but we will have to move forward regardless.
Yeah. They're all here.
They're all here now? Okay, perfect. Okay, yeah, you can do your, if it's you that do it, well, the normal.
All right, well, welcome everyone. If this is your first time joining us for one of our virtual committee meetings, you'll notice that you're muted and you're going to stay muted throughout the duration of the meeting. Only the co-chairs and the presenters will be unmuted. Following each presentation, the co-chairs will call on members of the public who wish to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon on your screen and pressing the raise hand button there. Do not press the wave or the thumbs up, those will disappear. Only press it once. If you press the raise hand button again, your hand will go back down. If you are calling in from the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once one of the co-chairs calls on you. The chat is available for technical support only to help with Zoom software problems. It's not to ask questions to the co-chairs or presenters. They will never see those chats. If you're using an older version of Zoom, you'll need to go to the participants section where you'll find the raise hand feature there. And finally, we encourage you to not wave or raise your physical hand at the screen because we may not be able to see you. So if you're having any problems, chat me. I'm here to support. And with that, I'll hand it back over to our two co-chairs, Sarah and Sandrea.
All right, thank you so much, Will. So greetings all, welcome to our Social Justice Committee meeting tonight. And we have a wonderful presentation regarding educational equity by Yorkville East Middle School, 177 students. So we welcome the students, their teacher, and all the other attendees. And Sarah, you can take it away.
Great, thanks, Andrea. So as Andrea said, we're in for a great treat tonight. We have presentations from students at MS 177. So for those of you who are orienting yourselves geographically, it's the middle school that sits on top of PS 158 on York Avenue and between 77th and 78th Streets. And we have Miss Rebecca Gardner here. She's an 8th grade ELA teacher at MS 177. And as part of her curriculum, she has the students work on educational equity as a topic. And so we get to hear presentations directly from the students who've done the work today. And I'll turn it over to Rebecca to introduce her students and to talk a little bit about what their the educational equity work that they've been doing.
Thank you so much. We're really excited to be here. Like Sarah was saying, my name is Rebecca Gardner. I'm an 8th grade ELA teacher at Yorkville East Middle School. And we do a project focused on making change in our community. And our students are able to choose an issue as a class of something that they feel is important to their community, their school experience. And 2 out of the 3 classes that I teach this year selected the high school admissions process in particular to examine. And as we examined that, one of the things that we saw about the way that that process is changing was that a lot of it was about trying to reach educational equity. And so the students did research together. They looked at a number of different articles, trying to learn and understand how it's changing, why it's changing, and all the factors that have gone into the decisions that have been made and also decisions that have changed. And so they spent some time, they wrote speeches in our argument unit using evidence from the articles that they read. And then all of the students had a chance to present to our class to share their ideas. And the 4 students that you're going to hear from tonight are 4 of the most powerful, well thought through, really incredible speeches that were written. And we're very excited to share them with you. So I'm going to start us off with our first student, Juliet. So Juliet will share her speech.
Should I start right now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt so belittled even though you've worked just as hard as the people around you? It's an awful feeling, right? When I was in 6th grade, I tried out for the cheer team. I showed up to practice every day we had it and put in my best effort. While other people missed multiple practices and/or sat on the floor during it, I went whenever I could and worked as much as I could. Fast forwarding a few weeks, the junior varsity and varsity teams came out. I was shocked to see that I was put on the junior varsity team after all of the dedication I put in, after even putting in more work than the people around me. My motivation for anything slowly decreased as I came to the realization that I dedicated so much time into something that ended up being nothing. Well, I can tell you that students all over New York City have had a similar experience mentally. There are a crazy amount of students that have felt unimportant because of our current admission system not valuing students, that everyone, and the terrible segregation surrounding it. Community Board 8. Today, I am writing this to you because currently the New York City middle and high school administrations have been causing so much stress and disagreements. Given that there are a large number of people disagreeing with our current system, we are in need of changes. I believe that New York City administrators need to take specific measures or figure out solutions to solve racial inequity so that we can give New York City students better and more inclusive experiences and education. I'm hoping we can change policies and take those specific measures because there are so many students who do not feel strongly about the admission process. The statistics of diversity in our schools does not match the diversity of our city, and students work better in classrooms with all kinds of students. Ever since COVID has gotten to the point where it's had an effect on schools, it has also had an effect on students. Since students have been stressing out over the delay of admissions, they've gotten a chance to really look into it, and now students are realizing that they're not happy with the policies. In the article, Facing Segregated Schools, Parents Took Integration into Their Own Hands, it says students will now be admitted into schools according to a lottery. The new lottery system has put intense pressure on students and their families. A lottery system for middle and high school students is juggling with children's futures. There are many students, including myself, that work tremendously hard to achieve the best grades you can get, and for our chances of going where we would like to go to school to get lowered is beyond unfair. In the text, The Lottery, Parents Fear the Looming Horror of NYC's new school admissions process, it says, I suspect there will be large numbers of disappointed families in the middle and high school process this year, simply because of one bad lottery number, which leaves them with 0 viable options. This recognizes that we can already see disappointment before the results of admissions are even out. We know that this is ridiculously unfair because it isn't like the students are arguing about the results considering that they aren't out yet, and that they're acknowledging that this isn't right for them or the people around them. Students from all over New York City who have had amazing grades have not gotten into any of the schools they wanted to go to and are now forced into making their parents pay for private schools because if they're not forced to make long commutes, because if not, they're forced to make long commutes to get to school every day. In the text, Beacon High School is half white. That's why students walked out. It says, if students within Beacon are saying that the system is not working, this means that even the ones who are benefiting are not having it, that this is not working for anyone. This undeniably says that the students who are supposedly benefiting from our system aren't even enjoying benefiting because they know that things are sufferable for everyone else. Students who are supposedly benefiting acknowledge that the people around them are struggling with it. That clears the air that nobody is happy with this. It is only fair if it's equally beneficial. If not, what's the point? Why would anybody want a system that only benefits a particular group and decreases another group's value? There should be something as simple as a survey that students can take so administrators or any adults can figure out what would make students feel more strongly about the system, instead of continuously adding new things to the system that create more worry than benefits. As you should know, New York City is one of the most diverse cities. Considering that New York City is a diverse city, you would assume that our schools should match that diversity. Unfortunately, somehow that is not the case. In the text, Why Are New York Schools Segregated? It's not as simple as housing. It states that Bill de Blasio said, schools are segregated because neighborhoods are. My immediate response to this is that it's simply not true. There are plenty of neighborhoods throughout our city that have schools which do not resemble the assortment in that community, and I can show you that. If this was a true statement, there wouldn't be a large number of not just students complaining about this issue on a daily basis. I struggle to figure out why people who were or are in power don't admit that we could do so much more to create a better variety of all races in schools. The text, Segregated Neighborhoods, Segregated Schools, gives us proof that there are a bunch of schools in which their neighborhoods do not match the school's diversity. Solutions have been hidden behind endless excuses for years, and if we can't recognize that these statements are not true, we won't be able to move forward. In addition to this, the text, Equity and Excellence for All, says 30.7% of our schools are racially representative today. To have a percentage below 50% of schools that are racially representative today is outrageously upsetting. Statistics couldn't make it any clearer to prove that New York City schools are lacking diversity, and it is not because the neighborhoods are segregated. We've also learned from the previous paragraph that students are commuting from all different neighborhoods, which suggests that there should be diversity coming from other neighborhoods too. And even if there was a lack of diversity in that neighborhood, there should still be heterogeneity shown in that school. We can take a look and compare statistics to recognize some of these many lies that are excuses of segregation. Administrators should make sure that schools in certain neighborhoods match the diversity of it, so they don't have to hesitate and create lies to backtrack why they think segregation is fair. In response to the lack of diversity in schools, diversity is beneficial to have in classrooms. Obviously, we want everybody to have the same equal experience in education, but it is not just that. It helps people that are being discriminated against. Having an assortment is actually useful for all. In the podcast, The Problem We All Live With, I heard that students do better in classrooms with other students in all different places in terms of how well they're doing in school. Students that fall far behind will learn more and be encouraged from the top of the class, and it gives the students who are almost doing well space to grow. If you're in a classroom with only kids that are falling behind, it'll be hard for anyone to catch up. If there is only a room full of students who are doing amazing, they won't be able to help their peers and there won't be much room for growth. In this case, if the excuse is that there is a higher percentage of one race in a school because people of that race had higher grades, we can easily argue against it. Schools look at students who have the grade ranges you need to get into that specific school. And I know, and you should know that for a fact, that there are definitely a variety of races that apply and have what it takes to get in. There is simply no way that a big portion of several schools are filled with only white people because they're the only ones able to get in. Therefore, it's clear that students coming from lower socioeconomic areas are not being given the same opportunities while they're very deserving of it. In the text, Facing Segregated Schools, Parents Took Integration into Their Own Hands, it says, children thrive in classroom environments that are filled with the rich diversity that is the hallmark of our city. It is common knowledge that exposure to various cultures and beliefs in a learning environment foster a more robust experience. It has been proven that in numerous cases, a ratio of all different races in a learning environment will be helpful. A classroom environment of people of the same culture who have gone through similar encounters would be a bore. We have so much to learn from people who differ from us, and to be separated from people we can benefit from would be a huge disappointment and beyond arguably cruel. Only being given the information that our current system of admissions has been a solution, you may argue against what I've been establishing. The opposing view would argue that our current admission system is advantageous and does not provide opportunities. Going back to the text, Facing Segregated Schools, Parents Took Integration into Their Own Hands, it says, each school has to set aside about half of its seats for students who are low income, homeless, or learning English. With those statistics, it would be easy for you to believe that admissions are exceptionally inclusive. They're making students with disadvantaged lives easier. Amazing. It's great that it does help one group of people, but what we don't discuss enough is that it actually creates more issues than it resolves. In the article, Possible Tweaks to NYC School Admission Include Lottery System Prior Test Scores, it says, many parents whose children aspire to a selective school says kids should get credit for their hard work. Now, regardless of whether this process is helpful, we can acknowledge that there is a downside. A large number of seats being taken away takes away from students' years of incredible hard work that they purposely worked hard on. That encouragement that comes from their teachers and parental figures becomes purposeless. Imagine dedicating years worth of time, getting buried with work for it to become useless. This should really set the claim that there is such a bigger downside to the middle and high school admission than benefits. All things considered, this analysis has summed up to help illustrate why the New York City middle and high school admissions need to unscramble or use suggestions to better our system so we can create a more miscellaneous experience for all. Each and every student in our community should be given the opportunity to live out their middle and high school experience to their best abilities. Building off of the fact that students should be allowed to enjoy their experiences, I have made it very clear that experiences have an amazingly positive impact when there is an assortment. Being in an environment where you can learn from other people who differ from you in many ways generates remarkable encounters and helps build professionalism. The more diverse a classroom is, the more intelligence you can build off and hold on to. If the knowledge that having students from all different backgrounds can be greatly impactful on students hasn't stuck to you yet, I don't know what could possibly be more convincing. If you have not understood the varieties of great outcomes that come from diversity, you need to hear this again. No student, especially at this age, should be worried about not having a chance to go somewhere they want to go because of their race or background. Especially while we can all benefit from diversity, there's no excuse that could say that diversity could worsen experience. We all deserve to be rewarded with equality, and there's appreciably more that comes with it. We deserve to be welcomed into an environment where everyone has differences and can enjoy the presence of everyone. In closing, the admission system needs to figure out how to make sure there can be a resolution in which we will not have a system that helps one group yet tears down another.
Thank you, Juliet. Our next speaker will be Aspen.
Hi. Recently, New York City high school students took a stand and walked out for change in the education system. I am speaking to you for change. If all these students care about their education, then you should too. Please give schools better resources, listen to people's personal experiences with the system and their opinions, and all this will help desegregate schools, leading to a better education for everyone. One way to help is to give more resources to schools that lack them. NYC students deserve a better education, and it's the DOE's responsibility to make it happen. What we don't want happening is schools getting worse because of the admissions process. An article from the New York Times states, for years, the districts used a competitive admissions process that ranks students based on these sources and attendance rates, giving rise to segregation even in a racially and socially economically mixed district. All students applying to high schools are put under pressure and stress that shouldn't exist. By following this system, both students who are advantaged and disadvantaged contribute to a process that segregates schools. It is the real problem, but you have to help make desegregation successful. One way you can help is by boosting schools and hiring more experienced teachers. This will boost test scores and allow students to have the scores they need to have more high school choices. This would be a great start. Then after all the schools are improving, you allow the application process to become optional for students who want to go to a different school, like a specialized school. This will naturally help all the students and the community because it will make families want to move to a district with better schools. You might think all the schools are desegregated enough and want to leave them unchanged, or you may think change needs to happen, but it's not your top priority. Either way, nothing is being done to improve the system. The Education by the Numbers article says, schools filled with students of color are less funded and employ more inexperienced teachers. Accelerated programs and classes remain less accessible. As you can see, it is proven schools filled with students of color don't have the same education opportunities. All the students have the right to an education, no matter what they look like or where they live. By increasing funding to these schools, you are benefiting the students and local communities. Data also shows that fewer than 3 in 10 students in gifted and talented programs are Black or Latino. Every child deserves a chance to live up to their potential with access to a school with enough resources to help them learn and thrive. When all schools are able to help students do their best, everyone won't mind going to their local school and the admissions process can become optional. We need to change the school systems, not only because of data, but because of personal experiences. For example, in a New York Times article, Beacon is half white, that's why students walked out, a person who identifies as Black and white said, I continue to recognize the privilege I had of escaping the system that many of my friends cannot. Every student should feel safe and comfortable with their high school and not be scared of the unknown. Will there be a long commute? Is the school safe? Do the teachers care? Will I know anyone? The admissions process is supposed to be something easy and not feared. However, everyone has different worries about where they will go to school because the current process is nothing but stressful and uncertain. People might argue that it's fine, but are you the student going through the system? We are the ones suffering with the system as it exists today and going to segregated schools. People who go through the admissions process deserve to at least have a voice of where they go to school. I understand raising funds and finding teachers is hard, and we are making a little desegregation process. The article NYC continues to move away from middle school admissions and high school admissions to be centralized states this administration has brought real and lasting equitable change to the admissions process that has dismantled historic barriers and opened up opportunities for more students than ever before. Yes, this is happening. Change for the better. Desegregation doesn't happen in 2 months. It takes years. The process you are using now is working, and funding, especially with COVID impacts, is hard. I get it. You could say breaking historic barriers is an accomplishment, but it isn't, considering they were broken while schools are highly desegregated. Even though there is progress, you could be making more. For example, Carranza, who was the chancellor, said, if I integrated the system, the next thing I'm going to do is walk on water. Clearly, this isn't a priority when it needs to be. Many students are taking this very seriously and taking action about desegregation. Do you hear the students, or are you listening? Everything helps improve the admissions process, but desegregation will be most effective. Some schools may be desegregated, but not all of them. In the New York Times article, data shows 81.7% of Black students in New York City attend segregated schools, which are less than 10% white. This should not be happening, and our schools need to be more diverse. Another disturbing piece of information is enrollment of Black student in majority white Southern schools peaked at 43.5% in 1988. These numbers need to change now, even though it is the South. Even if we don't change our city's numbers, we will end up just like them. Our city is one of the most diverse in the world, and our schools need to reflect that. I understand you may be worried about the money aspect, but it is proven when schools are desegregated, it improves and more people move to the area, eventually boosting the economy. Parents want a good education for their child, and when more people move there, it creates jobs, and the entire community benefits. Altogether, the school system must give more resources to worst performing schools, and it will help desegregate them. You can start with one district at a time. I know the worry about money, but this will lead to long-term improvements in the community and benefit children's education. When students learn with different ethnicities, it is proven they learn better. So, hopefully, if you take my suggestions into consideration, you can benefit people of all ethnicities and many communities.
Thank you so much, Aspen. All right, our next speaker is Abby.
Okay. Schools around the city are working to get hundreds of students into the schools they want to attend. They say there's no limit to race, disability, or social class, but that's not exactly true. Yeah, some schools have some Black or Latino students, but schools in poor neighborhoods or schools that are poorly funded pick up more Black and Latino students than the schools that have proper resources for their children. The hesitation to integrate schools throughout the city will put other children's futures or dreams at risk, not only because of their race, but how they're being taught. Students in the city deserve proper education, no matter the race, social class, ethnicity, or religion. Schools around the city deserve equal funding, no matter the district or neighborhood they're in. The article, Education by Numbers, states that schools filled with students of color receive less funding but employ more unexperienced teachers. Accelerated programs and classes remain less accessible for Black and Latino students, and their inability to tap these resources can lead to further stratification of class and race. Black and Latino students shouldn't have to give up on their dreams because they weren't taught the proper material to get up to the school's standards. How would you feel if you heard your child was declined from a great school because they didn't learn the proper curriculum? A New York Times article talks about this by stating, for years, the district used a competitive admissions process that ranked students based on test scores and attendance rates, giving rise to segregated schools, even in racially and socioeconomically mixed districts. If the city is seeing a decrease in Black and Latino students' test scores in the city, maybe it's time to change the way you evaluate students. Maybe you should focus on classwork and overall grades. The admissions process should also take into consideration the commute in the city. Students in different boroughs shouldn't have to worry about getting to school late because of where they live. In the article, NYC announces 22 to 23 admissions policies for middle school and high schools. It states, in reversal, high schools will continue to give admissions priorities based on whether students live within a certain borough or zone. Those priorities are set to be illuminated this year, but Mayor de Blasio's changed course, including Queens, changed course following pushback from corners of the city, including Queens, where families are concerned about bus commutes. Families have enough stress with homework and grades, and commutes shouldn't be added to that list. Children deserve equal education. African American and Latino students that get less funding and schools aren't getting the proper education. In the article, The Fight to Desegregate New York Schools, it says, resistance to integrate is rooted in some parents' fear that integration will take something away from their children. Families feel like having segregated schools is keeping the children from having better opportunities and more things to discover. I get that families may not want to integrate schools because their children may be uncomfortable or feel like their students will fall behind in the curriculum. But there are students out there that don't have half the privilege others may have. They don't get the proper funding or the proper teachers to get them where they're supposed to be. A New York Times article states that the work to address inequality and transform our school system is underway, pre-K for all through college classes for all. The Equality and Experience for All agenda is accurately improving the quality of our school systems. I honestly feel like even though the city is trying to integrate schools, they aren't thinking about the students who are in poor schools and who aren't learning the right material. I believe they're thinking more about the parents and trying to make them happy while working at their own pace to change the school system. Students that come from highly privileged families or good neighborhoods will obviously receive better opportunities in getting into good schools. But what about the other children? How will they succeed while being in poorly funded schools? A Chalkbeat article touches base on this by saying, an unusually large portion of the city schools use screens such as test scores, grades, and attendance for admissions. Students who are Black, Latino, those who come from less income families, disabilities, or learning English as their second language are less likely to meet the requirements. If you can clearly see that these groups of students may not get in with test scores, attendance rates, or grades, maybe it's not about integrating schools. Maybe it's about changing the requirements to get them into better schools. Maybe making a special program like the Diversity and Admissions Program. If you can't change the schools, change how you can get into them. I get that parents and children are afraid of what might happen to them in an integrated school, but it'll open up so many opportunities for the kids who never had this type of education before. The hesitation to integrate schools in the city will put other children's dreams and futures at risk.
Thank you, Abby. And our last speaker is Jake.
Great. Okay, 1 second. Okay. Imagine you're a Latino student living in Manhattan and you just got accepted into high school. Your white friend got into Bronx Science after all of his tutoring sessions for the SHSAT, but you got into Murray Bertram High School on the other side of the city. You're upset because your school did not have enough resources to prepare you for the admissions process, and your family did not have enough money to afford a tutor for the SHSAT. We can't just choose what race or ethnicity we are, but unfortunately, it can affect our education and placement in schools. Instead of focusing on furthering integration by removing screens, we should instead increase the amount of supply for group tutoring. Doing this could level the playing field on standardized tests and admissions to high school and middle school in general. No matter if we keep zone schools or don't, some families are going to be at the disadvantage. Right now, Chalkbeat says parents argue that cities should maintain geographic screens because they worry their children will be elbowed out of local schools and have long, far commutes. If we continue with the removal of screens, many students applying to middle and high school are both at disadvantage for not being guaranteed to get accepted into the closest school. Students should not have to travel to schools that are on the other side of the city when there are much closer ones. But on the other hand, by not removing geographic screens, many ethnic groups are at the disadvantage. This is because the Post says the funding gap for districts that are majority Black and Latino is on average more than $5,000 per student. This gives these students a much slimmer chance of getting into a well-resourced school, which will ultimately lead to the less preparation for school to come. On top of this, many low-income families in the school system can't provide their students with the extra help needed to boost their test scores to make up for the lost resources. NY Times conveys that Black and Hispanic students currently represent 70% of the school system, but make up just 10% of enrolled students in specialized schools. This inequality happens because the Federal Reserve states Black and Hispanic families have considerably less wealth than white families. Black families' medium wealth income is 15% less than white families. Because these families are not able to afford these well-resourced tutors for preparation for these tests, they're not going to be as prepared as these rich white families. This proves that in both worlds, ethnic groups are at the disadvantage with standardized tests like the SHSAT because they don't have access to the same opportunities. This is exacerbated because the NY Times tells us that at Bronx Science, there's 3% Black and 6% Hispanic students. At Stuyvesant, there's 1% Black and 3% Hispanic students. Lastly, at Brooklyn Tech, there's 6% Black and 7% Hispanic students. This just shows the racial injustices of more elite public schools is very unfair, especially for the ethnic groups, all because of the preparation help that's needed for these admissions methods. For a tutor to help students with this, their rates are as much as $100 an hour or more. Low-income families just aren't able to afford to pay for this type of tutoring. The inequality is occurring because much of the material is not taught before tests like the SHSAT. So the only way to do well is to have a tutor. To make this even worse, Chalkbeat states students who are Black and Latino or those who come from low-income families that may have disabilities are learning English as a new language and are less likely to get in. This makes it even harder for these students to learn even with a tutor, which can make it more challenging to get into a well-resourced high school. Despite the problems that arise from the current integration method, one way we can go about it that solves most of these injustices in implementing group tutoring because of its many benefits. Iowa State concluded that group tutoring functions like a team. Students share their perspectives and can rely on each other for support. Group tutoring allows students to share strategies for learning while promoting cooperation and understanding. It provides opportunities for students to share experiences, learn from one another, build self-confidence, and develop study skills. Using this style of tutoring provides the benefits of learning in the classroom, and it's even more individualized. Ethnic groups are going to be able to improve their test scores and grades significantly, which will ultimately get them into a better school. With this, families with less access to quality tutors in the status quo will only have to pay around $30 instead of $100 for access to great group tutoring. This sheds new light on integration as we know it because it provides a fair and affordable method for integration for all groups. This would give students newfound opportunities to excel in essay-based schools because of the new help being given. We know that these tutors are going to be helpful with the process because a study from GovInfo found that students with below average reading skills who are tutored by volunteers showed significant gains in reading skills when compared with similar students who did not receive the same group tutoring. This style of tutoring matters because, especially in my personal experience of using the method of one-on-one, I found that I did not learn as much as I would have if I was in a group setting. The reason I felt this way because most of the questions I would end up having were those asked by my peers. This is not able to be done in a one-on-one environment. Group tutoring is effective and brings new added benefits. On the other hand, some questions that might arise from the style of integration is that even at a reduced price, some low-income families are still not going to be able to pay for the tutoring. They have to spend the money on other necessities. We are able to address this problem because of the foundation the current style of integration has brought on. The schoolnyc.gov states each year the New York State school budget for the 2021 and 22 school year is $38 billion. The DOE also has a separate capital budget of over $19 billion to build new schools, renovate existing schools, and purchase equipment over 5 years. Since most of the money in the past years has gone to fixing up schools and furthering integration, we can use part of each budget to provide more resources and materials to the schools that lack them. With the other part of the budget, we can use more resources and material. With the other part of the budget, we can use the money to pay for the part of the group tutoring for the students and the families who are less fortunate. Because the budget would not cover everyone's group tutoring costs, there would be a certain threshold that would decide whether or not a part of the cost would be paid under the state funding. In conclusion, group tutoring for those who need it can further integration in a more manageable way, and it would be a huge leap to fully unsegregate the system where racial injustices are common from school to school. It would set the bar for how integration should be done and in a cost-effective manner. Integration being done this way levels the playing field for all NYC students alike during school and during the admissions process altogether. All students can have a fair chance of getting into specialized high schools and have access to better materials and resources along the way. Overall, the benefits of group tutoring can outweigh the harms of the current integration method. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jake.
Great. Wow. Wow. Awesome. Awesome. I'll just speak really quickly. To hear from all four of you young leaders, I'm so proud of you all. You did an extraordinary job and did your research, gave us some statistics. You taught us, some of us that might have not been aware. I am a person that have went through public schools, and a lot of things you were speaking about directly impacted me when I was growing up in the South Bronx. So thank you. And I wish that we had this type of mindset back then. I'm a 66 baby. I'm giving up my age, but no shame. But thank you. And I hope all four of your write-ups, essays, or however you all titled them, can be published. So I hope y'all are looking into that. Teacher, yeah, it was really good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to share that it's hard to believe that you're in 8th grade. You're incredibly poised, and I loved how you cite the sources, supported your arguments, just like Sandrea said, and how you used your own experiences to inform your arguments. And these were incredible presentations that are so well-rounded. And so thank you so much for presenting them to us today. I see that we already have questions. I have one myself, and I just want to recognize that our Youth Libraries and Education co-chair, Taina Barrero, is in the audience as well, in case, Taina, you wanted to jump in on any of the questions. But I'll go ahead first to Rita, who has her hand up.
Bravo, that presentation was absolutely fabulous. I am a former New York City elementary school teacher. I will give you my age of 83. I taught starting in 1961. In 1963, the school I taught in was in Upper Washington Heights. And in 1963, we became a receiving school. And because it was a totally white school, I happened to have a student taught there, and they asked me if I would stay on, and I did. And the difference of the children that we were getting, it wasn't in the children, it was in their level of education, was so startling different so startling different. I will say with a great deal of pride, there is a young man named Oscar who is walking around still muttering my name under his breath, but I let him know that I was going to live through that, and so was he. I made him bring his lunch to my classroom, and we worked during class. He was bright. He came into my third grade class and he couldn't read. So his record was longer than both my arms because he couldn't read in math. He couldn't read in social studies. He couldn't read in science. So he was disruptive. He had nothing to do. And I looked at him. I thought, Oscar, I said, Oscar, this is not a democracy. This is a dictatorship. And I'm the dictator. And I, with a great deal of pride, I will tell you that Oscar scored above grade level in the exams at the end of the year. He could read beautifully. But I had children who could read, even from children from Harlem, who could read the New York Times, in with children who couldn't read it all. It was a very, very difficult job. I am disheartened to hear that we still have this nonsense going on, that we haven't learned. It's 60 years, I'm not asking for a learning curve in a year or two. I'm asking 60 years. Didn't we learn anything? Didn't we know that we had to integrate the schools? And when I went to school, we all just went to the neighborhood junior high at that time, which is the middle school. We went home for lunch. You didn't take a test to get into junior high. You didn't take a test. The only schools that you took a test to get into for high school were music and art, performing arts, science, Brooklyn Tech, and Stuyvesant. Those were the only schools that you needed to take a test for. I am proud of your students. I am proud of you. I am sad at the same time that we haven't done anything better in 60 years about integrating. It's too slow. We need to do it much faster. We're running out of time. So thank you, thank you, thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you, Rita. I just wanted to say that Taina, our youth libraries and education co-chair, I didn't mean to, but I caught her on a night when she's babysitting. And so she wanted me to say that she can't come off mute, but she wanted to tell the students that they give her so much confidence that the future of the city is so bright with young leaders like you. So, well, if no one has a question, I wanted to pose a question to the students. So something that I heard in your speeches was the need for us to think more collectively and for us all to give, for those of us who have more to give to making things better for everyone. And so I wanted to ask you, how do we convince the families who are already benefiting from the system that to do their part? And that seems to be a big argument that we've been seeing when it comes to policies and strategies that can increase diversity in schools and provide more equal benefits across our student body in New York City. So I realize that I probably just gave you like a question that is the big unsolvable question that we're all facing. And so what are your thoughts about that?
And if they are muted, they could raise their hand.
Are you okay if I start?
Go for it.
Yeah. So
Thanks, Jake.
I was thinking about that question. I think that's a very interesting question. That has a very tricky answer because it's a very in-depth question. But I think that it's not fully about convincing the people directly about who are already benefiting, but I think it has to do with like providing, because we can see and we have like the evidence and the statistics that show that that there are, even though they're trying with the integration to help more people, that there are still many groups that are at the disadvantage, and that what we do, there's going to be some people who are going to have a better chance or a better opportunity to get into a school, like one of these top well-resourced schools. So I think it has to come down to convincing and formulating a better system to provide not just the people who are already at who have a better chance of getting into these schools, but overall give a better opportunity to everybody.
Adding on and agreeing with Jake, just trying to get everybody, the more privileged, to get into a better resource school, and like people who have less of a chance of getting into those schools, just making everyone understand the situation, because then maybe people will want to help and want to use their voice to help make change and help all these other kids get an opportunity, because we all have the right to an education.
Thanks, Aspen. Jake has his hand up again.
Just wanted to say one more quick thing that I think Juliet briefly mentioned this, but one of her pieces of evidence in her argument talked about the students at Beacon High School, and how that even as those students are the ones who might be benefiting from this system, they were still concerned and agreed that it wasn't just about what's going on. And I think that's like one way and like one step towards convincing and having everyone in New York City and in the school system have a better understanding of what's going on, so we can make more informed changes.
If I might, I also think one of the things that we saw in our classes was, going into this conversation, there were students who felt that way, who felt that, they were like, well, I think we should change the high school system so it's better for me, right? And as they looked at the numbers, I think that was a place where students changed minds, right? Where they saw places where the statistics felt undeniable, places where actually having to like work through the argument from like the same set of data, I think really caused students to grapple with some of the things that they were like, this is a belief that I have formed in my experience versus this is what the data is telling us. And so I think, and obviously because we're talking about people's children's futures, there's so much emotion involved, but I think having people grapple with data and having people grapple with stories from individuals, I think has a really strong impact on what they're able to, like what matches up between beliefs and facts.
Yeah. I see Rita's hand up. I want to just pose a real quick question to the students, if possible, and even the teacher if she wants to answer. And if you all want to answer, or one of you, but how would a conversation with an elected official go with you? How would you start that conversation regarding educational equity? So one of you can just put it out there. You might be talking to the mayor, your city council member, your senator, your congressman or woman. Yeah, and just curious if you had that opportunity, any of the students or the educator, the teacher.
Well, originally I would think about posing, like, if I did have the ability to talk to them, I would probably first start by introducing, like, even though, like, this is posed as the solution and like one of the best ways to go about integration, I feel like highlighting all of the problems and the issues it's been causing, especially like on not just family who have lack of resources, but like all students' mental well-being for having to do so much just to get into high school, and using, like, especially like most people, everyone here mentioned in their essay, like how everyone worked really, really hard to get in, like to get their grades up, to do the best they possibly can, to just like not have it matter as much as it should, perhaps, in the admissions method. So I feel like opening like these members' eyes to like what's going on, especially like in the student point of view, would be really important.
Great.
I agree with Jake because they should take a look at the statistics of it and not just keep like making up excuses and saying that things like neighborhoods diversity is just why that's schools in that neighborhood are like have that diversity, because if you look at statistics, it's very clear that that is not the case at all, and that there are so many schools that are in communities where there is so much diversity, even though it does not match it.
I think something that I agree with Jake and Juliet, but I think also making kind of people see and feel empathy almost for what we're going through, because that's something that it helps people understand others' point of view and help solve a problem, because if you understand where someone's coming from, it's easier to make a compromise or find a solution to anything.
Y'all, they really listen. We talk a lot about audience in my class. We do, most of our writing is geared toward a particular audience. We really like to ground our writing in real world issues and what it would be like to address people, thus us presenting to the community board. We also had a class that focused on mental health, and they presented to our school's counselors. But I think one of the things they touched on, a couple of the things that I think are really important, and one of the things you can hear in all of their speeches is that they really thought about both the like emotional and like statistical ways to reach an audience, but also thinking about, you know, connecting with that audience's interests, right? And you know, you'll notice that like they understand that a community board deals with money, and so they all made sure that they were addressing budget issues. They know that a community board deals with like community satisfaction, and so they were addressing also like, what do we do about satisfaction? And I think, you know, for us as we're thinking about addressing people, audience is so important. And so when we're thinking about politicians, we're also thinking about, you know, what is important to them, what are their goals, you know, both the ones that are the pie in the sky things, but also like the reality of their day to day and what they deal with and who they answer to. And so I think that I can hear that in all of my students' answers, that they're thinking about like, what is it like to answer to somebody, and also what is it like to connect with them?
That's great. Rita.
I have a question for Ms. Gardner and for the students. Do you think that the parents have to be educated better in the process of how they can help their students work through the minefield, which it sounds, this labyrinth is quite confusing. I mean, my grandchildren are going through this for college, but it's hard to believe that you're going through this for junior high school or middle school. Do you think that it would help all the students or make it more even if parents were involved and taught how they can help their students?
I would say parents should know because they can help their child and support them. And just like even a little help and support makes everything easier because we still have homework and like have to keep up with school and studying, and like some of us I know have like sports or extra activities. So having kind of the support where, oh, I can't make a Zoom of a school tour, oh, my parent can do it and show me the information, or we can watch it online together, because it's important for not just where I'm going to school, but for my mom and my dad to know that, and for them also to feel comfort that I'm getting the best education possible and how we're applying there and why I like that school.
Excellent. Thank you.
I'm gonna add one more quick thing. Like, I agree with what Aspen has to say. Like, I think their parents are get helpful, and like if they would understand, to an extent, because parents don't have, even though they are the one thing I feel like they would be that they are a big help with, especially like school guidance counselors, is like understanding and helping with each student and their kids' mental health, because it's a very, very stressful, and the process is very involved. Like you have to be like, you have to write essays. There's a lot going on, especially like inside the process, but then there's also, like, as Ashley mentioned, there's schoolwork, there's extracurriculars. And I feel like it doesn't just have to come from the parents, but I think it has to be a collaborative effort from the parents, the teachers, the all the people really involved, which it shouldn't have to be, because it's to an extent where there's so much going on that even with this help, it makes it harder to focus and to understand like the process, because there's not a direct, my parent isn't going to help me better understand they're understanding the Zoom open house just as well as I'm understanding. It's not going to be, really has to come from like inside, not like the inside the system and like administrators and so, because the parents just have the same access that students have. So I think it's a combined effort.
Thank you.
And I think, Rita, your question begs a really important other question, which is, should a young person getting into high school require that they have an adult with the time and the availability and the knowledge of the system to be able to get into a good school. And I think, you know, the question asks a question of equity is, you know, if we provide, like anything in a school, if we provide time to educate parents, are we asking of parents who already are, you know, perhaps working 2 jobs or raising multiple young kids or, you know, balancing all of those extracurriculars that their kids are doing? Are we asking parents then who are already spread thin to be spread thinner? And I think Jake hit the nail on the head when he talked about, like, this has to come from above the change in order to alleviate some of the stress of that process that Aspen and Jake were just talking about, that the process itself maybe does require that parents have an immense amount of knowledge. But I think it asks the question, is that appropriate?
That's a great point. That's a great point. I wanted to ask, so Sandra and I co-chaired a meeting with the youth libraries, youth schools and libraries, youth education and libraries, sorry, committee, on the impact of COVID on schools. And so for the students and for Ms. Gardner, how have you seen COVID impact admissions, since that's the process that you've been researching? Go ahead, Jake.
I have to tell, like, one of the biggest parts, I think, like, COVID does have a huge impact on, like, this current admissions process, solely based on not, I think one of the most important things about understanding what school and environment fits you is by visiting the school and, like, seeing how it's laid out, understanding, like, the curriculum, which you can't really get through a Zoom online open house. That meeting isn't going to tell you, like, you can make a much more informed decision after seeing the school. It's much harder to make a decision or something based off photos or a couple people you've heard talk. You haven't, and even talking to students, stuff they're referencing, you're not able to see or understand because you're not in the building. So it really makes it adds, like, a little opportunity and, like, the lottery on top of not being able to understand fully about what school experience you're getting into. It's a big decision, and it's not easy to make that huge decision based off of a Zoom meeting or 1 or 2. It's not as helpful as it would be as an in-person meeting, which is not really possible right now.
I agree, and adding on to Jake, like, this happened to me. I looked at a school on a website and photos, and I wasn't a big fan of it. And then it was a public school and it was in person, and I wound up really loving the school, and now it's high up on my list. So I think COVID does, like, what if something I put on my list I may not like because I never went there or never stepped foot in the building? I know that I probably will like it, but these things still go through my head, and COVID is, well, the reason for that.
I also think I wish that students from our 3rd class who we're studying mental health during a pandemic and how we're handling that in schools. We're here because I think a lot of what came out of their research and their experiences was that, you know, the schooling experience, the past, like the students who spoke today, they had half a year of 6th grade and then they showed up as 8th graders. And so even just the disruption to their middle school experience and the way that that affects academics, the way that that affects their mental health, the way that that affects the grades that they have to offer, the skills that they learned, right? There are kids who really thrived in virtual learning, and there's kids who really struggled. There's kids who, like Aspen was saying, like, it's hard to imagine the kind of school you want to be in when you haven't been in school. And so I think there's so many layers to just kind of the social and emotional aspects that then have played into kids' academic experiences as well. And then, you know, to have information about when the admissions process is beginning and when it's closing come out at the peak of another surge, you know, is a whole other added layer. I think our students deal with so much stress just living in the world that we're in right now. And so having, I can say that I'm incredibly impressed with how resilient our students are in the face of constant change, but the high school admissions process is just another array of changes that they're experiencing on a week-to-week basis.
Wow. Folks have any other questions for the students or Ms. Gardner? Rita?
So I just want to understand, I know those specialized schools that you take a test to get into and still today, what are the high schools offering that, do they offer different, each high school offers a different curriculum, or what's the difference between the schools other than proximity as to where you live, but what's the criteria?
So I can just quickly answer that one. There are a number of different types of high schools. There are specialized high schools, which are like the schools that you take the SHSAT for, the ones, you know, the ones that we know historically have been a part of our city. There are audition high schools, which have been around for a long time. There are portfolio high schools, which are sometimes arts high schools, sometimes writing high schools, sometimes science high schools that are looking for a particular portfolio. And then there's screen schools, which screen schools are schools that have, in addition to the regular admissions process, they're allowed to select from a menu of different ways that they can screen students that are just within their school. And there are lots of schools throughout the city. After Bloomberg's Small Schools Initiative, there are tons of really particular focused high schools. There are high schools that offer particular programs or that use a specific sort of educational model. So it really is like shopping for a college in a lot of ways, in that you're looking at access to different programs, different internships, different like AP and accelerated classes, different testing requirements or class expectations. So there's like a lot of different factors that go into choosing a high school in the city, and it is very much like a college process.
Thank you. It's new to me.
Before we jump to, I think Wendy has her hand up, right? Our public member.
Yes, I do.
I just Okay, 1 second. I want to just recognize May Malik, a former member of CB8. So thank you for joining us. I know that education equity is very important to you. So thanks again for stopping by. On you, Wendy.
Yay. Juliet, Aspen, Abby, and Jake, what an outstanding job. I really love how you folded in some hard data with a thesis. And I think that's a very important skill to have for the rest of your life. I have been using that skill to testify before CB8 and other governmental entities on environmental issues. And I can't wait to see what you choose to do with this tool as you go on. And a lot of you mentioned the kind of education or preparation you get in order to apply to these schools or do well on the tests or be considered. Are there specific courses or experiences that you wish, if you were the head of the school system, what would you put in place in terms of curriculum to enrich the students so that they had broader choices? And then I have a follow-up, which is, what do y'all think that you might do after high school and maybe college?
One thing I wish I had for the specialized high schools, for the tests, I took it, and I wish there was kind of like what Jake was talking about, like kind of groups, cause just like groups and maybe that like an after school program or something like that where people and families where their kids want to go to a specialized school but don't have the money or resources to get tutoring that's $100 an hour can still learn and get what they need to do well on the test and kind of be with people at school who are also taking the test and kind of collaborate and work together, because sometimes like with a more challenging problem or something, or like working independently than checking the work, it makes it easier, and I feel like that would be something that would help me a lot.
I would say she took the words out of my mouth. I was gonna say the exact same thing. So a group environment, especially like being able to help each other out. Like, as I said in my essay, like one of the big parts is being able to, most of the questions that I'm going to end up asking are those asked by my peers. It's really helpful to be with another friend or a peer in a certain lesson to understand their questions too, because those questions sometimes you might not have, but later when sometimes you wish you asked that question so you understand that certain part of the topic which you wouldn't get on one-on-one tutoring or in a setting where you're doing the work by yourself.
Adding on, I think that the school should take our grades more seriously because students work so hard to achieve the grades that they achieve, and it's not fair that after years of hard work, they don't even pay like close attention to their grades.
And I just wanted to follow up with Wendy's follow-up question, which was a great question, Wendy. So as you guys are thinking about your futures beyond high school, maybe even beyond college, what are careers or passions that you have that you'd like to pursue? And you've got a great audience here. Maybe there's folks here who are working in those fields who you may be able to connect with. And we also have a representative from the Office of Assemblymember Seawright's office. And so, so to the extent that any of us can be helpful to you as you're thinking about your careers, do let us know.
I don't know if
Don't
any
be
of the
shy.
I don't
Don't
know
be
if any
shy.
I don't know if you all missed the question within that, which was, do you guys have any career aspirations or ideas of what kind of fields you'd be interested in pursuing after you're done with school?
Honestly, I'm still like deciding. I haven't really made or like spent the time trying to make an informed decision. So I can't really fully answer that question. Sorry, but
Okay.
I think it's a great question.
When I grow up, I want to be like a therapist. And also during this like time, there's been such a change in students' mental health. And I feel like people who are in power need to acknowledge that students have been struggling so much, and to continuously keep changing like rules and adding things that are just only going to make things worse for children is just something that's really unfair. And they need to like pay closer attention to how students are feeling during this time instead of just like parents and what they think is best for the kids.
I'm not exactly sure what I want to do, but I know I either want to like help people or like animals or something with helping.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Clearly, they all are leaders already. So let's give them a applause, because y'all are clearly leaders in your own right, and y'all are developing. And I'm excited. You know, a child shall lead. So you all are going to blossom into future leaders. And I'm excited for you all. And thank you to your teacher for pouring into you, and everybody else that have educated you along the way and in the future. Y'all are going to be great. Go ahead, Sarah. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Thank you, everybody. And I just wanted to touch quickly on what Juliet said about mental health and how this has been a really tough time. I'm sure you've heard so much about people talking about the resilience of students, and you have been incredibly flexible, but we've acknowledged your resilience, but you mentioned the flip side, which is all of the work that it takes to be that resilient. And that and so you're right that the people who are in power or who have the ability to make change need to keep that in mind, that we can't continue to keep on expecting students to be flexible and not at the same time hold the need to address and support mental health at the same time. So thank you for that. So Rebecca, do you have any closing words for us as we near the end of this time? I do have one piece of new business, but I wanted to make sure that you were able to close us out if you'd like.
Yeah, I just want to thank you all for listening, for giving an audience to young people. I think, you know, my passion has always been in helping young people to find places to have their voices heard. And, you know, in past years, we've presented to other groups as well. And I think the opportunity for students to see the impact of their words, the opportunity for students to see like this is truly how changes get made in the world, I think is so massively important. And having an adult audience of people who are listening to them with the seriousness that they're bringing to these issues, I think is really an incredible opportunity. And we just really appreciate your support of our school and your support of our community and your support of our students as they take on these really tough issues that adults are struggling with. And it never ceases to impress me, the like ingenuity of young people and their ability to see kind of the Occam's razor sometimes of the issues that we as adults pore over for hours. And so I think it's really incredible to be able to have these students share their perspective. So thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Does anyone have any old business? Seeing no hands, my one piece of new business, some of you may know I'm currently a graduate student, and my research team is working on a research project that is taking public perspectives of the Black Lives Matters protests. And we're trying to understand why we can see the same activity, but police interpret actions in a certain way, and other members of the public may interpret actions in a different way. And so Will's going to put in the chat a link to a survey where we're surveying law enforcement, members of the criminal legal community, as well as New York City residents on their experiences and perceptions of the protests that have over the last 2 years, and their perspectives of protest activity, whether it's lawful, peaceful, and what the appropriate police response should have been in the participants' opinions. So we are reaching out to as many people as we can. The only limitation is that you're a New York City resident, because we're trying to focus on New York City. And so please feel free to share the survey out with your community. And it would be so helpful to us to get more participants and perspectives in this research project. So thank you. And I'll turn it over to Sandrea.
What's the deadline for the survey? When does it end? Is there a deadline?
We are trying to finish collecting data by the end of March.
Okay. All right. You all heard it here. Share it, share it, share it. All right. So once again, thank you for attending. Our presenters, our educator, and everyone. We have a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Nobody. Rita stepped away. She wouldn't know. Put a hand up. Will. Wendy, our public member.
Wendy,
okay.
thank you, Wendy.
Good night, all.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you, everybody.